Hello again. It's another episode of Rebirth Reread for the Detective Comics run of James Tynion IV. Again, I'm reading one issue a day, timed so that when I get to the final issue, 981, that has not yet been released, that will be the day it's released. So I'll have read one issue a day all the way to the last issue. And here's my stack that I've been working from. But today's issue is going to be 936. And you can see that instead of the regular cover, I again have the variant. Raphael Albuquerque, again of American Vampire with Scott Snyder fame, did the variant covers for all 48 of these issues. A pretty impressive run for any cover artist, let alone a variant. Here's the regular cover by interior artist Alvaro Martinez. He used a lot thinner line in this than he usually. He and his inker Raul Fernandez used a lot thinner of a line than he usually uses for his cover work, but that gives it sort of a horror flavor from the multiple mouths eating Batwoman. Now, the reason I chose the Albuquerque cover instead of that was because I'm not a big horror fan, and so I did not really want that really dark image of Batwoman being swallowed by Clayface. Additionally, that image is related to this comic in that at the end there's a really clever tactic where the entire team that Batman's assembled in this Detective Comics run uses Clayface in a ball format to escape from the colony, as you see here, the soldiers of the colony. But it's misleading because it looks like Kate doesn't want to be eaten by Clayface, but in fact she's using him as an escape. So I thought that it was misleading, and so I decided to go with this very exciting yellow and red conflict between Batman and the colony. And this is very similar actually to the regular cover of last issue, 935. So I just decided, since I got the variant of last issue, which had Batman and Batwoman together instead of Batman fighting the colony, this time I'd get Batman fighting the colony. It happened that was the variant this time. So that's the covers. The team, again, are all going to be pretty much by James Tynion IV. There's a couple co-writers that we'll get into when those show up, but until then, that hasn't changed. This is the first appearance after 2 issues by Eddie Barrows, the main series artist for this run of Detective, of Alvaro Martinez. I believe he is a Brazilian artist. He and his inker Raul Fernandez have worked together for quite a while, and they worked on both Batman Eternal and Batman and Robin Eternal. There's actually a really amazing 2-page splash in which Cassandra Cain sees a ballet in Batman and Robin Eternal number 7, I believe, which is just fantastic, and I think really showed why James Tynion really wanted to work with Alvaro Martinez. And it's really cool because Martinez and Fernandez are going with James Tynion to the newly announced Justice League Dark series, probably premiering in July of this year. We don't have the solicitation date in June, so my guess is that's going to happen in July. So there is a lot going on in this issue. As I mentioned, the team has to escape from the colony, but the real point, the real main accomplishment of this comic is that Jacob Kane, the father of Batwoman, turns out to be in charge of this colony that's been attacking the Bat family. And this is a very controversial choice. A lot of people think that it is a villainous turn for Jacob, but I have never seen it that way. I think that the colony is Black Ops. It's not quite as morally gray as, say, the Suicide Squad, which is deliberately using evil people to accomplish the United States government's purpose. Whereas this is using soldiers, people who have dedicated their lives to trying to serve their country to achieve the government's end. Now, They use harsh tactics, and they are antagonists to our heroes, Batman and his team, but that doesn't make them evil, and it doesn't make them villains. So I think that the whole argument that Jacob Kane is some kind of evil dictator or fascist villain mistakes the entire context of this. And we'll get more of the flashbacks where I think that you'll see that he has really good motives, and in general, he has done good things. He says in this issue that he saved thousands of lives using Batman's tactics that are militarized, except that he does use lethal tactics, which is why Batman, as you can see, is very upset with him. Batman himself actually doesn't really appear in this issue except in a flashback to show that the 50 soldiers that surrounded him last issue captured him. So this issue is Red Robin and Kate as the leaders of the team in Batman's absence, responding to Batman being kidnapped. Kate asks her father to come to the bell tower, the belfry, as Tim calls it, and he betrays them. He turns out to be the leader of the colony, which they did not know. And so the colony is the major antagonist for this run, these 48 issues of Detective Comics. And I don't think that it's been a very controversial choice, but I think it's a good choice because it gives us a villain who is, well, not a villain, again, an antagonist who is sympathetic. There's good in them. And I always think that although there are great stories to be told, you can't really have a relationship with the Joker. I know Scott Snyder disagrees with me with his Death of the Family and then Endgame story where he implies that the Joker and Batman are in a quasi-romantic death relationship. But I find that entire relationship really off-putting and not... It doesn't really tell a story about something that touches my fears, whereas I like the exploration of those. Do the ends justify the means? What is the correct tactic to use in fighting crime? Can you expand that to a war? So I like the colony a lot on an ideological level as an antagonist. I don't agree with them because, Batman is my hero, but I think that they're not villains. So painting Jacob as evil isn't helpful. Additionally, if you'll notice, when Jacob reveals that he is responsible for this, he says that he's been trying to bring Kate in, and she says, "You keep lying." And a lot of people, I think, are fooled, or are not fooled. They interpret Batwoman's character and Jake's character through the lens of the New 52 series by Hayden Blackman and J.H. Williams III. And in that series, Jacob is a much more sympathetic character. He's very fatherly towards Bet Kane. He has a very avuncular aspect, and we never see him doing that many questionable things. But I think if you go back to Greg Rucka and James William III's Elegy, and then Go and Cutter series back in the first run of Detective Comics that featured Batwoman, I think you really see that Jake is a morally ambiguous character, someone who keeps a lot of secrets. And so I've always thought that the colony really makes sense as a continuation of what Greg Rucka, the creator of Jake Kane, meant to do with the character. He didn't mean for Jake to be this sort of avuncular, fatherly figure. He meant him to be a very morally ambiguous and complicated figure. So that's my point. He's not evil at all. He's just really complicated, and he's working against our heroes. So, the artistic thing actually goes with the artistic highlight goes with our callbacks. So here, this is the first page, and this is my artistic callback. I love the way that you see this is clearly Kate because her hand is very white. Kate's always been an extraordinarily white-skinned character, naturally, not like wearing makeup. And you see that this is framed in the shape of the beer glass because she's at a bar with Renee telling a story about her training and how she was being trained to be a leader, and her trainers were very hard on her. And this is very important because Kate's arc through the whole series, she's one of the main characters who has a series arc, has been really struggling with what does being a leader mean? Can you be in the shadow of Batman or her father, and which side does she believe in? Which side does she think is the right to devote her life to? Because she's always seen her costume as a uniform and her service to her country as the war against crime rather than Batman's personal justice or vengeance struggle. The reason I highlight this and the reason I think it's a callback is because Alvaro Martinez is going with the same kinds of things that you see with J.H. Williams III in Elegy. J.H. Williams III really liked to do these kinds of 2-page or 1-page spreads where not only is there panels going on, you see these panels here, but there's also a wider shape that really pushes the narrative. So here, this is the reveal that the villain of Elegy is actually, so she's called Alice, named after Alice, the Wonderland character. She's actually Beth, the twin sister Batwoman. So you see that they are in the same pose, but in a yin-yang shape, with the yin-yang. And that, and you see the heads of the characters form the eyes of the yin-yang. It's fantastic shape, but also narrative because it moves forward and moves your eye. And it makes you sit. Now, some readers have really said this destroys narrative propulsion. And I think that's true. It does destroy narrative propulsion. You can't read this as quickly as other comics. But I think that is really good because it's not just a pretty shape. It's not just something that's really appealing to the eye. It is something that adds meaning to the story that's going on. It adds narrative meaning. So if your main criteria of a comic is that you must read it quickly, this is bad. I don't think that's what it is. I don't agree with Alan Moore that comics should be completely different than movies, but I do think that there are times when you can use the comic medium, the sequential art medium, to use the dual nature of the sequential, so panel to panel, but also the fact that you can see the whole page, whereas in a movie, you can't see all the shots together. Although some directors like Ang Lee in The Hulk and Guy Ritchie in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. have used a split screen technique for similar purposes, but the fact that they're moving means it's very hard for you to actually process what the image means. Whereas something like this, you can take your time and think and look at it and really revel in the thematic and the symbolic content of this whole page and the individual panels. So, here we see the beer glass. It's not quite as complicated as that yin-yang symbol in Elegy, but it's got that same feeling of the bubbles forming the panel breaks and a clear read-through and a real sense that everything forms this wider picture of Kate learning to be a leader, and then she's contemplating that over a glass of beer. And I think that's a really nice callback, and it's my favorite artistic image of this issue. There's also a little callback to something when Tim, a terrible Snickers ad, when Tim attempts to get control from the colony, you see that it says, the general, in Leet speak. That's a hacker code, so like Morse code where you replace vowels with numbers. The general, we're going to see next issue, and he's actually also a villain throughout this. And unlike the colony, he's actually a villain, which we'll see. But he's a callback to the Chuck Dixon era of Robin when Ulysses Armstrong, named after famous generals, is very militaristic in his opposition to Tim Drake's much more let's live a good life and help people. Whereas he's like, no, I must rule them with my military. And he was very Roman, and he is actually kind of fascist, and that's played up in this series, but we won't see that quite yet. So this issue, Batman Detective Comics number 936, the third issue of this run, I think is keeping up the same frantic action pace, which leads to some problems later because there's a bit of a pacing issue between the first and third issues. You don't know how long the second issue actually takes place over. But the betrayal is really well handled. The dialogue is, again, very strong. Lots of really delightful character moments when Batwoman sends out the bat signal to her entire team and they get a little beeper. And every character has a little moment. I'll show you that real quick. You have Orphan watching ballet. I mentioned that Alvaro Martinez drew a great 2-page spread where Cass finds the ballet for the first time in Batman and Robin Eternal. You have Steph sleeping, and she says, "Spoiler, needs sleep." And it's really funny. I love the humor there. Basil's at an audition, and then you see her father, and there's a really suspenseful, suspicious looking shadow, sort of foreshadowing that he's about to betray them. So, yeah, this issue has great character moments, has a really fun action packs, really inventive world building with the things like Clayface used as an escape method, and lots of great callbacks in the art and in references like the General. So I give this a 7 out of 10 stars again. This has been the third episode of Rebirth Reread for Detective Comics by James Tynion IV. I will see you tomorrow.